All right. Welcome, everybody. I think just building on Dea's talk of a couple ago, the picture in my title, picture here is of the Harry Smith trials. And this is from 2014. This is the Cedar 12-foot or 3.7 meter spacing, one of the plots. And this is just for reference, is about 50 years old. So gives you an idea of kind of what a picture of some of the stuff Dea was presenting looks like. All right, so on this talk, I'm going to give it short, and it's just building on a talk I gave in the last meeting of this group in February 2019. This is work that started in the Aerosmith TSA IRMP, which is an integrated resource management planning process that the TSA went through, and where we were developing strategies for timber and non-timber. And under the timber, we explored different strategies, volume strategies, as well as value strategies, improving sort of the volume times the value of the timber harvest. And in the end, the stakeholder group chose the value strategy for the timber piece. And that was based on more aggressively managing for cedar on ecologically suitable sites. So since then, there's been some work done, and I'll just quickly, we'll do a bit of a background and then we'll go a reminder. So basically what the table here at the bottom is kind of a site index by Beck at 50 years for some of the major species on the coast for some of the major ecosystems. And really what it is to point out that, you know, there's a number of nuances associated with managing mixed species stands. And one of them is their expected growth development. And so really what this shows you, if you look across the rows for the same site, you can see that there's some fairly significant differences in height at predicted height at age 50 for those species. So for example, on the top one, the DM site series 01, Douglas fir is predicted to have a top height of 34 meters, hemlock 30, and cedar 27. So if you imagine trying to grow those species in a mix, you can imagine there might be some challenges. Now, there's other factors associated with this, forest health, there's other shade tolerances, there's other things that go with this. But one of the things that I've learned is that this kind of difference in site index is something that needs to be paid attention to. Because you can see some pretty good examples in nature about what this transcends to. So up in the top left is a picture of, again, the Harry Smith trials. And this is showing the forester standing in one of the very small plots of a cedar, the 1.8 meter spacing, which happened to have some Douglas fir plots beside. And so what this shows you is basically that the Douglas fir aggressively grew out of the ground, overtopped the cedar, put it into a subdominant position, and basically killed most of the trees. And the few that are left are barely hanging in there. Another example on the right is a naturally regenerated stand after fire on the Seashell Peninsula, where the big tall trees are your Douglas fir, and the rest of them are cedar. So you can see that these things, other things being the same, these things play out. I don't have great pictures of cedar hemlock mixes, which we're going to talk about here, unfortunately. I still need to fix that. But yeah, basically we're going to go and talk about how this affects those mixes as well. So basically from the Aerosmith IRMP, we did some modeling with task 2, looking at mixed cedar hemlock stands under a couple of different scenarios. One of them being natural, with no treatments aside from planting. And then secondly, one where the cedar, where we space out the hemlock, that's predicted to compete with the cedar. So basically these images, there's going to be 3 of them at different ages, just a reminder. And basically the cedar are green trees, the hemlock are blue. The left side of each of the images is the untreated. So basically a plant of cedar at 900 stems per hectare with the site index of 23, with a natural infill of 1,500 stems per hectare of hemball with an average site index of 25. The right-hand side is the same stand, but it's juvenile spaced to 900 stems per hectare favoring cedar. at about 12 years. So what you just look at these images and as they progress through time, and you can start to see what happens, what the model predicts. So here's at age 40, you can see the left-hand side has got quite a bit of blue in it, and the blue trees are generally taller than the cedar. On the right-hand side, where the spacing was done, you pretty much got mostly cedar with a few tall hemlock. And then as you go more towards culmination age or a rotation age, you can see the untreated on the left-hand side has, you know, a nice mix of cedar and hemlock. But you may not notice that the cedar are smaller, and so you can see some of them have been subject to competition according to what the model thinks, and so you've got some differentiation in cedar sizes there. And on the right-hand side, you've got a pretty uniform stand of cedar with some scattered taller hemlock. So the idea here is that there are some influences when we try to grow cedar, especially in areas where we get lots of hemlock naturals, which is that is very common actually on a lot of our sites. So in terms of the IRMP, the Arrowsmith IRMP, what that turned into is that the left, basically the base case or the blue line in these two graphs, the left side being a log volume projection coming from TAS, and the right side being an average log value coming from TAS. The blue lines are so-called base case for the untreated, the left-hand side of those past three graphs. And so basically, you can see that. And then the red line in both cases is the right-hand side where the spacing was done to favor the Western red cedar. So in this case, you see the volume impacts of the spacing were virtually nothing. You've got a very much the same projection for volume, but you can see by improving the amount of that stand that's actually in cedar, and that the cedar log sizes are actually bigger. I can't show you that here, but that is the case. The cedar is not only there, but it's actually got larger log sizes because of the lack of competition from the hemlock. You see a pretty significant increase in the average value of the stand through kind of general harvest ages. And that's the part that excited the stakeholders in the Arrowsmith, and that's why they chose a value strategy, which employed planting of a lot of Western red cedar and also juvenile spacing of that to ensure that we were going to end up with the cedar component. So subsequent to the IRMP work, there's been some things that have been done. I'm going to briefly touch on these. At the last time I talked to you in February of 2019, there was this, Eleanor and I were working on this juvenile spacing opportunity, which is basically looking at all of the different aspects about the prospects for a spacing of hemlock or a brushing of hemlock in these mixed stands to favor cedar. Following that, the North Island did a trial in 2018-19 looking at trying to actually implement one of these spacing treatments or brushing treatments. We'll talk about that a little bit. Since 2017, District Mission has been quite interested in managing cedar and well, they've been managing cedar for a lot longer than that, but they became interested in actually employing some of these brushing techniques. So we'll talk about that. And then finally, the South Island District has been doing some analysis looking to see how many stands they could find and whether we could actually implement a brushing or spacing treatment on those stands. So we'll talk quickly about these different things that have happened. So basically the FFT report by Eleanor and I for FFT basically used a bunch of task simulations and sensitivity analysis to look at the prospects from a financial point of view for juvenile spacing, we called it, to juvenile space the hemlock to promote the cedar. And the bottom line is that with pretty much a pretty robust analysis showed that you could afford to spend up a fairly big amount of money per hectare to and still get the government's required 2% return. So it basically confirmed what we thought, which is that a financial analysis with a good amount of sensitivity showed that there was a pretty robust case for, if these stands could be found, that it was worth doing it. Okay, the North Island Cedar Release Trial. So this was one that Strategic Natural Resource Consultants with FES funding did. You can just see some of the key aspects of the site. So this is trying to implement that sort of Aerosmith type strategy on a medium to good site where cedar was planted. And basically you can see lots of hemlock came into this site. And, you know, literally out of 14 years of age, basically a juvenile spacing of a free to grow stand. And you can see the results of what we got from what they got from the crop trees. And you can also see what it cost. We'll talk a little bit more about the learnings at the end. So I mentioned the mission, district and mission. Kelly Cameron has been very interested in growing cedar for a long time. And so what she has been doing with her plantations is looking at where she's been getting significant hemlock natural infill coming in on these sites. They have very good sites, medium to good sites in Mission in general. And so what she was wondering is whether she could improve the operability and the treatment costs and things by doing the treatment at a younger stand age. So predicting which sites were going to have the problem and getting in there promptly and cutting the trees when they were smaller and reducing the costs. And you can see that these are operational trials. And what we have some pictures that they don't show well here, but from having toured the sites, I think she's on to something here. All right, so then we got to a bigger program here following in the Aerosmith, where basically the district was interested in implementing the recommendations of the IRMP. So basically trying to find these free to grow cedar hemlock stands, less than 25 years old on medium to good sites, which are common in the district. The planting records show that a significant amount of cedar has been planted in a lot of these areas. Unfortunately, though, the challenges of going through the data, silviculture data, results data, and as it translates into VRI, makes it very difficult to find these stands that way. And then secondly, when you go out flying, you end up having a really difficult time finding cedar on the non-SHRP sites on the landscape, which is kind of a little bit concerning, but that's kind of what the district found. So they didn't find too many opportunity areas, which was surprising to all of us. And then we actually tried to attack the stands that they did identify on the ground to actually find out what was going on. And really what we found is that there were none of these areas were suitable or feasible for treatment. And there were some key reasons for that. A lot of the time is it was too late. A post-free growing stand of cedar hemlock on a good site, the hemlock just grows so quickly that it overtops cedar so quickly that you start to get some really big hemlock really quickly, and you get to start to have a lot of cedar that's either dead or very suppressed very quickly. On the other hand, you find that the poorer sites with Salal, the SHRP type sites, they don't tend to have the competition, they don't need the treatment, and yet the data doesn't really allow us to find where those are too quickly unless you've got an ecological inventory. Finally, you find that there's a lot of access issues due to dealing with older roads. So makes sense, you're dealing with stands that have been established 15 or 20 years ago, and the roads generally get beat up and it gets hard to get there. So what did we learn from these various different works that we did? So first of all, identification at a landscape level using available data is very, very challenging. This is partially, this is a lot to do with how we track data. The number one thing for me is where was cedar planted? And well, by the way that our silviculture records are kept now, we don't get too spatially distinct about where cedar's planted versus mixed species versus other species in an opening. Things get blended together, and as a result, you have a really hard time finding out from the data where actually cedar was planted and where you should be worried about hemlock coming in. treatment of the younger stands is clearly, I think, got some, is the way to go, and it's got many benefits. I think the Kelly Cameron approach shows that a gardening approach to, pre-free growing treatment of hemlock when it's small it lowers your cost substantially. You reduce the damage to your crop trees, the cedar crop trees. You also reduce the time when they're suppressed. That reduces the chances for sun scald and snow press and things like that. Secondly, around communities and fuel loading relative to fire, you get definitely way less fuel loads by doing the treatment then. You also have better access, newer roads, which is definitely beneficial from a cost point of view. So what are the challenges to doing the right thing? Because I do think treating these stands at an early stage is absolutely the right thing to do for the owner of the land. The problem is that in our system, the treatment of younger stands means they'll be treated as non-free growing stands. And that means that the government can't effectively fund the treatment of those directly. And it leaves the treatment costs to be falling under the basic silviculture appraisal allowance, which I won't get into all the details. For those who work in industry, you will understand what I mean. For those that don't, you can ask me about that. But basically, it is not conducive to adding costs for special treatments on special sites to a system that doesn't give, where the licensees don't feel like I have enough benefit to doing the treatment. So what this means is that the right thing to do is not feasible. And I use that word not feasible because it really isn't. Some people feel professional reliance and other things should be, making our licensee foresters do this, but it's not really the right way to look at it. I don't think it's really a business decision. The owner of the land is the one who should be making the investments and putting those investments wherever they want and whenever they want. And right now we have a system that is absolutely not allowing these treatments to happen. And the worst thing about all of this is that has led to a response by licensee foresters generally to say, well, if we're not going to be sure that these hemlock are going to be brushed out, then we're not going to plant cedar on our medium to good sites. So what I see out there is a big trend towards cedar being definitely on the poorer sites, the cedar salal sites, the ones that don't have the brush, the hemlock competition issues, but that are good to medium sites where we really do need to be growing the cedar to make an important contribution to valuable forests. We're not doing that because people are scared that their cedar investment in planting will go by the wayside because it will not be brushed and tended to promote the cedar. I think that's it, Cindy.